Hi, and welcome to another edition of Danny Brown Talks Phoenix. I am your host, Danny Brown, and today I am joined by Jayme Fisher, who is an estate planning attorney from Legacy Law. Welcome to the show, Jayme.
Thanks for having me.
So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about estate planning?
Yeah, a little bit about me. I'm back in the Valley a little over 20 years now. I came back after I graduated high school with the intent to go to college and ended up working full-time and living with my mother while she fought and passed away from breast cancer.
Oh, I'm sorry.
But I got on with a bank. It was good opportunity, ground level, and went from being a teller to going into internal IT and help desk. And two things happened. They started to change their positions to require degrees, and I knew I wouldn't be able to advance without one. And as legal things came up in my life, like buying a house, signing a real estate contract, signing a pest control contract, auto accidents, I realized I really enjoyed researching and finding answers to the law. So I worked full-time and got my bachelor's degree, and then I left the bank and went to law school.
Wow,
Yeah.
that's really impressive to be able to do that and balance work and going to school.
I wonder how I had the energy, but yeah, it's good.
Yeah, so are you a native to Phoenix then?
I'm not. I was born in New York. My dad worked for Xerox, so we transferred to Texas for a little bit and then here. And then I had a 2-year stint in California, but Arizona claims me by majority.
Yeah, and now you're back.
Yeah.
So what, tell us a little bit about estate planning then.
Estate planning, in its simplest form, it's basically financial planning. It's an aspect of that. It's where you decide what happens to your assets when you die, what you pass on. But if you have a great estate plan, it does more than that because it also tells people what to do with your assets and how to take care of you if you're incapacitated too. So.
I think a lot of people kind of forget that. When I think of estate planning, at least a few years ago, I thought more, I don't really have any assets. If I die, like, there's not really anything to be left to anyone. I don't really care, which is kind of a selfish attitude. And I think a lot of people have trouble discussing, it's kind of a morbid conversation and uncomfortable to talk about your own mortality and death and to think about that. So, you know, I think it's important to have you here to kind of discuss with our audience why those assumptions that I made are wrong assumptions.
Okay. Well, let's go back to assets. A lot of people think you have to have a lot of assets. You have to be rich. The probate process and the will process, that's there to substitute your signature on things. So passing a title to a car, passing a deed if you have a house, that is a big asset. But little things like that, bank accounts, if you have a safe deposit box, you're going to have to get a court order to show the bank, to show them that you have the authority to go in and get the safe deposit box. So estate planning, you can put things in place that make that easier for your loved ones who are probably grieving and don't want to think about those kinds of things and then go through all the hoops that they have to go through and go visit court downtown and deal with judges on their schedule.
I mean, the last thing you want is for the government to decide who gets your stuff, where it goes, how your things are dictated.
Exactly. You want to have control of that. You want to be able to pass that on, especially if you have kids.
Yeah, absolutely. So at what point should someone consider going through the estate planning process?
Loaded question.
Yeah.
Because recently I've been dealing with a lot of single people. And in that instance, it is thinking about who can step in if something happens. If I'm in a car accident and just laid up in a body cast or, heaven forbid, in a coma, putting that kinds of thing in place. And then also a lot of these people like me transferred from back east or out here for jobs or because that's where they went to school and all their families back. So they don't have anybody here that would naturally step up and fill those roles. My passion is families with minor children. If you've got an asset, then obviously you want to try to preserve that asset for your kids. But in particular, you want to think about nominating somebody to be a guardian, even temporarily, if something happens to you. So that's my passion.
Yep, making sure that the kids are well taken care of. So it sounds like going through the estate planning process is probably good for almost anyone who has just the medical aspect of it, to not have, who would make that decision if you didn't have a plan in place and you're a single person and you were incapacitated? Who, and you don't have a plan in place, who would then decide for you what happens?
It's tricky because I'm actually talking with somebody about that now, about kids going to college. Once you turn 18, you are a legal adult and emancipated from your parents. They don't have that authority. And now more and more hospitals and doctors are cracking down on that. I can't give you their medical records. I can't discuss their treatment plan with you. So I know that eventually parents who come in and get involved will be able to work with the hospital to some extent, but I don't know the process by which they'd have to go through if you don't have anything in place. And to some extent, your spouse. People think that just kind of naturally they have that authority, but with HIPAA laws, not necessarily. There are things about your records that they are not free to divulge. So you want to think about that. You want to put it in writing and give them just something that gives them the authority so that they don't have to struggle.
Yeah, because, I mean, you use the word eventually. And I feel like if you're incapacitated and in the hospital, you don't want to eventually have someone have authority to be able to say yes to a surgery or, you know.
Well, hospitals will do what they need to do in emergencies. And to some extent, obviously you're the next of kin, so we might have to have some conversations and there might be some things you have to do. I've never worked in a hospital, so
Sure.
I don't know the steps that they have to go through to do that. You know, you watch movies nowadays. I think I was just watching The Big Sick, and her roommate called her parents because she was at college, and they came, and they show the parents having that conversation, but you just don't really know what they had to do to get there and really how informed they would actually in reality be.
Sure, and it's probably the last thing that they want to have to deal with if you're laid up and sick or incapacitated. So then you should definitely have an estate plan to plan for those types of things. You should have an estate plan in place if you have any sort of assets, things like a 401k, personal property, those types of things, so that you can kind of dictate where that goes. That kind of sounds like a will.
Well, a will, yes, but a will is really designed to be given to a judge in a probate setting to say, this is what I desire to happen. And then essentially you have this proceeding where creditors can come in, family come in and can kind of contest, hey, did you really mean that? Did you have the capacity to do that? I mean, that doesn't always happen, but it's guidance. Whereas with a trust, that's outside. That's kind of set. I've given these people authority. They can just do this. It doesn't have to go before a judge. I don't have to get permissions. And then, of course, there's the fee aspect of that, too. If you're in court, you're paying court fees. You are potentially paying lawyers' fees. And just probate in general, I think I heard that the average fee for that is 5% of the estate.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So anything you can do to avoid that is really in the best interest of your family.
So can you bypass this stuff by just assigning beneficiaries to your account?
There are a lot of things, and you mentioned 401ks. There are a lot of things that do pass outside of will and outside of probate. So life insurance policies, anything that has kind of a beneficiary designation. But where you want to be careful, and why my passion is families with minor children, is that they can't inherit. So if you've left your spouse as your primary beneficiary and then your children as your contingent or secondary beneficiary, and something happens to both of you out on date night or something, now what would have passed outside of probate is pulled into the probate court, and it becomes part of the proceedings to determine the guardians and to assign a trustee. They create a trust for your child and assign a trustee who's going to take fees, and they're going to do that for you, and they're going to direct it. Whereas it
would be someone that you don't know,
Right.
don't trust, that's
Right.
probably never met your family or kids.
Somebody they're going to have to report to every year to get an accounting, receive an accounting, and you're just making them do that much more work.
So just for clarification, you've mentioned the word trust a couple times. Is that the same as an estate plan?
A trust is a piece of an estate plan.
Okay.
Estate plan really is kind of a general, this is the plan that's in place for what happens to your assets and potentially your issue if you pass. The state has an estate plan for you. It's the intestacy laws. It just might not be what you would like to have happen. And a will is a form of estate plan. So it's very general, but there's things that you can do that are better, that
Okay.
might better meet your needs, your goals, be better for your family. You had mentioned, I think I heard a story once that there was one gentleman who did not need an estate plan. He had whatever his benefits were and his policies, and older children, didn't have anybody he was concerned about, didn't care if the government took taxes, didn't care if the court took fees, met with the attorney, and he's like, nope, they can take it. I've worked for it. Government's free to tax it, and they're like, we're good to go. That's the only person I've ever heard of who didn't need to put some kind of planning in place.
I would still put some,
Right?
screw the government. Right. I would at least have that go to some sort of charity or
Right?
something,
people, yeah.
something other than the government, because they're not going to spend it wisely.
And just the healthcare piece of it alone.
Sure.
That aspect. I'm surprised that he just wasn't concerned. So.
Just didn't care.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, so I did an estate plan not too long ago. It was before my now wife and I did some international traveling, and we thought it would be a good idea. We had bought a house together and just go through this questionnaire and kind of plan everything out. And it was pretty in depth. I mean, we went through a lot of questions, a lot of different scenarios on if this happens, then this happens. We had to decide what happens to our cats.
Yeah.
Which was strange. What do we want to have happen to us when we die, which is a weird thing to think about.
Yeah.
I myself want to be turned into a bio urn.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So that I'm turned into a plant and just put in the
love it.
ground.
Yeah.
I feel like there's something really weird about the embalming process and being stuck in a coffin in some box.
Oh, I'm with you. I'm
Yeah.
with you on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what would you suggest to someone then that they, at the very minimum, that they have in place?
It really depends on the person and the situation. Without knowing their relatives and their assets, but healthcare power of attorney, I would love to see everybody have something like that in place.
And do you have to have an estate plan to have a healthcare power of attorney, or is that something that you can set up on your own through, I don't know, like a legal Zoom or something like that?
You could.
Yeah.
There might be some considerations there that you don't know what you don't know to think
Sure.
about. But it is a piece of the plan. It might be very small, and you might be, discombobulated if you're just doing it piecemeal. But get something like that in place at least.
So a lot of my audience, obviously, I'm in real estate, so a lot of my audience owns a home. So if you're a homeowner and you don't have kids, what should you have kind of in place as a minimum, would you recommend?
Again, a little tricky because out here it's community property. So we have joint tenants, tenants in common, joint tenants with right of survivorship. And
Which means if you pass away, the home just naturally goes to the spouse.
the other, the other tenant. And that's great to have an effect. There are some things that you can do in death that you can't do in life. So if you are concerned about potentially, say, your spouse getting remarried and their new spouse getting half of that estate, or creditor issues, you can leave it in a protected trust upon death. Whereas if they just get it outright, they just get it outright. Now, there's also some tax implications with that, with basis and whatnot, that you'd want to talk to a CPA about. So, again, it comes down to goals, what you've got, what your plans are. Sometimes, like I say, beneficiary designations and transfer or payable on death, you can get around some things, but the more you acquire, the bigger your family gets.
So it sounds like, almost anyone should sit down with an estate attorney and kind of put these things in motion.
I'd recommend. Just ask the questions, come away with the information. At least you'll know better what will happen if you don't do any planning, and what's important to you and what you need.
Now, if someone does want to meet with an estate attorney, is there upfront costs to that, to have that initial consultation?
It depends on the attorney. Attorneys really like to do the free consultation piece of it. I don't know that you'll get a lot of information doing it that way. I mean, come and ask your questions and get the simple answers I've given you.
Sure.
With me, I do a family wealth planning session, or you also know it as the Guard Your Legacy planning session. That's a 2-hour session with me where we sit down and discuss what you have, what the situation is, and what would happen, and then what your goals are and what it would look like to make those goals happen. And then at that time, if we decide it's a good fit, we can just go ahead and go right into designing of a plan.
Okay.
Now, for that, I value that session. That's 2 hours of my time at
Sure.
$750. But I do give people a way to get that for free, to waive that fee.
How do they go about getting that waived?
Well, if they mentioned working with you and or seeing this podcast,
Okay.
that is something that I would give those clients, because
Oh,
those are
very
people
nice.
who are very serious
Yeah.
about what they're doing and their planning.
Yeah. I mean, I really believe in estate planning and think that it's, I don't know why the conversation is so uncomfortable to think about if you were to die, if your spouse is to die, what happens to your kids, what happens to it's a conversation that you need to have.
Yeah.
And everybody's going to die. It's just a matter of when and how.
It's true.
And so you need to have these conversations. You need to be an adult about it and really think and kind of strategically plan what's going to happen. Now, everyone's life changes over time.
Mm-hmm.
So how often do you have to revisit your estate plan, as you mature in life?
My clients, we're reviewing it every 3 years.
Okay.
Because you've got changes in assets, changes in family, and changes in the law. So we want to make sure that it's what you have put in place is still going to meet your goals. And then if it doesn't, we can discuss updating it. And if it does, then you're great. Keep going. It varies. I mean, if you can, sit and review it once a year to make sure. But that's say, people don't want to think about it. They want to, many cases, they will do the documents and put it on the shelf and they'll never look at it. And
Right.
that's where it fails. And 8 out of 10 times it does fail. So 3 years, I feel, is kind of a comfortable mark. The law isn't as quick as we'd like it to be. And generally, you buy a house, I find people are in for an average of 3 to 5. So that's kind of
People tend to
the good
move
point.
during, when major life events happen, and those tend to seem to be around that 3 to 5 year mark. So that makes sense. So do you have people set up on plans then to where you reach out to them on their 3 years, or is it up to them to contact you?
A mixture of both.
Yeah.
I think in my agreement I have that the onus is on them to reach out to me, but I do have a calendar that I keep so that I'm always keeping up with who needs to come in and sending them some kind of an email reminder.
And so tell me a little bit about the process then with children, since that is your passion. What are some of the things that people should think about and consider when they have kids and putting an estate plan in place?
At the very least, having some kind of insurance, or again, if you have a house, something that will take care of them.
Like life
going
insurance,
forwards.
you mean?
Yeah. A lot of couples that I've talked to recently talk about having their life insurance pay off the house, keeping the house for the kids, at least until they're out of school. But that's your responsibility to make sure the kids are taken care of. And then second is to nominate guardians, to think about who you would want raising your kids, who's going to raise them the way you would, and making sure you're putting that down, and then giving them the funds that they're going to need to do that.
Are there things that you can put in place to keep the funds from being wasted? I think to some specific examples where someone passed away and someone that was not mature enough to handle the situation inherited a large sum of money and squandered it. So are there things that you can put into place while you're alive to keep your children or whoever's inheriting your funds, your life insurance policy, what have you, from spending that money just willy-nilly?
If they're inheriting outright through an insurance policy, no, because that is just going to get paid outright if they're over 18. But through a trust, you can stipulate to some extent. If you want to leave it to them in trust, then you can guide them, maybe have set distributions at ages or dates or time frames, maybe,
Or accomplishments?
Right. we encourage you to go to college, so we'll pay for your college, and then maybe once you've graduated, you get a 10% or 20% disbursement from the trust. And then once you hit 30, maybe a little bit more, stagger it up that way. We also have clauses in there that if they are having difficulties with creditors, they're in bankruptcy, they're in the middle of a divorce, if they are having issues with alcohol or drug use, that it stays in trust and they don't have access to it. You can actually cut off distributions at that point too. If you know that ahead of time, you can have a spendthrift trust. So you have somebody that's managing the money, and the child's never the sole trustee where they can withdraw.
So if you know your kid's a screw up already,
I've had some parents that are concerned.
Sure.
Yeah.
So, but I think it's smart still. That's why you want to sit down with someone who has experience, because they're going to help you consider all these different scenarios that you might not otherwise consider yourself.
Yeah. The question is, if my 18-year-old got a windfall, what would they do? What choices would they make? Would they really go to school like I want them to? Are they going to go out and buy a really nice car and blow it on parties with their friends? What's their maturity level and what's going to happen
Which is highly likely for an 18-year-old who's lost their parents.
Right.
Yeah.
True. And if you have to think about the grieving process too.
Sure.
The other thing to consider is with a trust, it's private, but with probate or the intestacy laws, when you go in, it's public record. So you have people out there who are watching to see if somebody who's young
Vultures.
and naive, and they're going to be there and they're going to make contact and they're going to try to separate them from their inheritance.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what does the cost to meet? I know the initial consultation is $750 through you, but what? So say, yes, Jayme, I want you to help me create an estate plan and set up a trust and go through this entire process. What's the fee structure look like for that?
I do it based on packages, flat fees, all up front. There's no surprise, no billing on the back end,
that's nice.
because I want people to talk to me freely and to reach out and to build that relationship. That's what's important
When you
to
think
me.
attorneys, you think
Right.
you're being billed per hour and you have no idea what they're doing.
Exactly.
during those
Even when you
hours.
get the bill.
Yeah.
So I do it based on packages, and mine range from 1 to 8,000 or more, depending on the complexity of the estate and their goals. Most families with kids, that includes the kids protection plan, average about 4,000 to 5,000, and that's a trust plan and all the ancillary documents, and then the package that helps protect the kids.
So it's not a cheap thing, but it's probably worth what you're paying for.
And depending on what you've got in place in your assets, it's far less expensive than what you could end up paying on the back end. I mean, obviously you won't be there when that triggers in effect, but what's going to come out of their inheritance and what's going to end up being paid in fees, it's far less expensive to do it up front. Yeah.
And we've talked a lot about, both spouses dying at the same time, but oftentimes just a single spouse passes away. And I imagine that, again, as a grieving widow or widower, that's the last thing you want to deal with is worrying about all this paperwork.
Right.
So having this stuff kind of in place and planned out ahead of time saves you a lot of grief so that you can grieve properly.
Right. It's in place. And hopefully you've got a trust advisor you're working with, like me or a CPA or financial advisor that you can turn to, somebody you've established a relationship who could, right, and ideally, that can guide you through that as well, because they know it's there and they know it'll work. And you mentioned, again, that people find it so hard to talk about it, but I'm noticing that couples are having the conversation in pieces, talk about, well, hey, if anything happened, who would we want to raise the kids? And maybe it's easier to kind of digest that in that little bit, but just to talk about it and not to put it in writing and to give it effect, it's just the biggest mistake that you make.
Yeah, why talk about it and then not execute on that plan? Because nobody's going to be aware of that conversation, and it's not binding.
Right.
So
I had somebody tell me they were really worried that if they put it in writing, then something would happen. So kind of creating that. And I found the opposite.
They jinx themselves?
I find that it's when I put in writing, it's never going to happen.
Right.
So I feel like, oh, what a waste. But no, it's the peace of mind that comes from doing it.
Yeah.
And like you say, we've had the conversations. Now let's tell everybody else so that they know and it's there and they don't have to think about it.
Yeah. And the government's bad at a lot of stuff. And the last thing I think any of us want is for them to be up in our lives more so than they already are.
Exactly. That really scares me with kids, because a judge is going to name the guardian of your kids, and you want to give him the information to make that. Otherwise, he's looking at pieces of paper and he's weighing people out on pieces of paper and just the picture you're seeing. I had a family that I think the husband had a brother and the wife had a sister. The husband's brother, great family man. They had 3 kids of their own, wife, nice big house, kids all about the same age. And the wife's sister, single, and never had kids, never had a husband. But she was the one who had the same core values that they had, who was going to raise the kids the same way. And the other family, were having their issues internally, and just on paper, this looked like the best choice. But to know the family, it really was the single sister who was going to make the best parent and was going to do the best job. And it's guiding that.
Sounds like the plot of many movies.
Right? Plus, there might be some family members in your life that you don't want to raise your kid.
Sure.
And as part of what we do, we can write letters that will only come out if they come up in court and petition to be guardians. Then that goes to the judge. This is why we wouldn't want that person raising our kid. And it's giving them the most information. They say best interest of the child. Give them the information they need to make that decision.
Sure. And I'm sure, like all courts, they're probably backed up.
Yeah.
And do the kids end up in Child Protective Services while this is all being figured out?
Potentially.
Which would be a nightmare.
Yeah.
Nobody wants that. So this is all part of your child protection plan that you have?
We actually have a piece that helps to nominate temporary guardians and give caregivers authority so that kind of situation doesn't happen. If you've got somebody who's staying with the kids, somebody close by, give them the authority to hold the kids until your potential permanent guardians can arrive, and just keep the police from having to take them and put them in some kind of stranger's home during that awful period.
And can you nominate guardians that aren't family?
Yes, you can.
Yeah. Very nice.
Yeah.
So how long from start to finish? You said 2 hours, but is that the whole process, or is it much lengthier than that?
Well, that's the planning session. Once we've had that and we've got all the answers that we need to move forward, in about 4 weeks, I meet back, and that's where we can formally sign all the documents. I confirm with you the decisions that you've made, the spellings and addresses and all that information, and then we sign, and then your estate plan is in effect. But after that, I still need to kind of put it together and put it in a finished product package for you, as well as create a digital copy. So another 4 weeks later, we'd actually meet again, and then that's when I have the delivery of the binder, and you pick it up. And then this is where I feel I'm different from other planning attorneys, because that to me is the beginning of the relationship. It's the package and the documents. That's a byproduct of our relationship going forward, because we are going to meet and make sure that plan is going to work for you. And at that delivery meeting, we begin to create what I call a legacy library. And we record a video message from you to your family, your children, your guardians, whomever you want to speak to at that time. And I have a list of topics that you can talk about, or something you come up with. And it can be something as simple as, I want to say thank you for taking care of my kids. This is what's important to us, education, military, that's where we would like you to guide the kids. These are our values. What I want to say to my son at graduation, or what I want to say to my daughter on her wedding day. That's the legacy. That's the piece of you that we really want to capture, and that's what we want to pass on.
That's super valuable.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, I'm immediately getting images of Avengers Endgame with Tony Stark, and at the end when he's the hologram.
Right? Right? Tony. Oh, yes. That library. He had a vast
Spoiler,
library. Yes.
Iron Man dies.
Oh, Danny, you didn't.
I think everyone's seen it by
I
now.
know, right? By now, yes. Billion worldwide. They had to have.
Yeah. So he probably had an estate plan in place.
Yes, Tony, yes. He should have. If not, shame on him.
Yeah, right.
But you know what? Pepper made sure he had an estate plan in place. Yeah.
So what are some other things that make your law firm different besides the legacy plan, which is super cool, by the way? That's using like technology of today to help kind of pass your message along. I think that's really cool.
Yeah. It really is about building the relationship. And that's why I got into estate planning, and that's why I started legacy law, was because I didn't want to just create documents. I didn't want to have these these one-off conversations with people that I potentially never see again. And I didn't want their family looking for, I see this all the time with the state bar. Somebody's passed away and we are looking for the will of John Doe. Anybody out there, did you create this? I don't want the families having to go through that. So that is
Sounds
what's
like
different.
ambulance chasers. But
Well,
just,
I don't know, but maybe to some extent.
yeah.
Because you are kind of always chasing that client to create those documents instead of building those relationships and really becoming a trusted advisor for the family. And then for me, it's the kids protection plan, which is a trademark package that I'm licensed to use. And those little things that, a lot in the legal industry just didn't think of.
So really, I mean, the overall lesson that we should take from the conversation is that almost everyone who's an adult should probably have this conversation, regardless of what assets you have.
Yeah.
Now, if you're a renter and you've got a couple thousand in the bank, probably not, maybe. I mean, would you, at least you probably should still have that health.
Healthcare, yeah.
What was it called again?
Healthcare power of attorney.
Healthcare power of
and
attorney
maybe
in
a
place.
HIPAA waiver, something.
At very minimum.
Yeah.
But if you have any sort of savings, 401k through your work, life insurance, if you own a home, you absolutely should have these conversations.
And you're thinking about it because when you fill out those forms, they're asking you, who does this going to? 100% this person? Do you want a secondary or contingent? So you're thinking about that. And find a lot of people don't go back and revisit that. I've heard countless stories where people got divorced, but one of the spouses didn't change the beneficiary designation, so their ex.
Oh man.
Yeah, their ex inherited. So
wow.
Yeah. Well.
Now, if you already have some sort of trust or estate plan in place, but it needs to be updated, can people come and visit you for that?
Absolutely. We
So
can do
you-
a trust review. And if it's done well and you've got everything in place, great. You continue with that peace of mind knowing that. And if something needs a little tweaking, then we'll have that discussion.
What's the cost for that sort of consultation run? I know it's going to vary in range depending on the
Again,
depth, but-
that consultation, I give people a way to do a little bit of homework
Sure.
and get that for free to come and have the conversation with me. So
That's nice. It's
Yeah.
great that you offer that. It allows people to kind of test the waters and make sure that it's right for them and a good fit. So I like that you do that. Is there anything about estate planning or trusts that we didn't touch on that maybe we should have?
I can't think of anything. I mean, there's all this stuff that's in my head that,
Sure,
that
yeah.
I hate to inundate people when I meet them, and I try to dial it back a little bit. But just sit down, think about the structure, and start asking the question, what would happen if I didn't come home today?
I mean, I think you're being
What's-
very selfish if you don't have these conversations, especially if you have kids.
Yeah.
I mean, that's incredibly irresponsible.
Yeah, yeah. And if you're just willing to do a little work, gather up some documents, sit and have the conversation, you might walk away feeling relieved that everything you've got in place works for now, and there's nothing more you need to do. And just that feeling and that peace of mind, it's invaluable.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I can't stress enough that how important this process and having these conversations is to just plan for the future. Accidents happen all the time. I mean, people get sick all the time. We're not planning on dying anytime soon, but it happens every day to people,
Yeah, it does.
which is unfortunate, but you gotta plan for it.
Yeah. And I had a couple recently that have had to update their trust because they've had a child that they didn't have before. And, the smaller package, the little bit of forethought in the beginning, and all I have to do is make a change. Like, okay, we're just going to change out beneficiaries a little bit. That could be just a simple amendment to the trust. And having that thought that it saves you money in the long run if you really do start to do the foundational planning and think about it in advance.
For sure. I mean, it's taking care of your loved ones
Yeah.
so that they don't have to worry about this stuff and fight the government,
Yeah.
which is, want to avoid that at all costs.
Yes. I'd highly recommend it.
So if people want to reach out to you, how can they find you?
My website is azlegacylaw.com, and then my email is info@azlegacylaw.com. And I think my phone number's on there as well.
Perfect. We'll make sure that's in the show notes. And
Cool.
we always like to wrap things up with some Phoenix-based questions.
Okay.
So I would like to know, with you having lived here so long, what is your favorite Phoenix restaurant?
If I'm celebrating something, yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't
Your
have to be
graduation
like
anniversary, something,
Yeah.
Ruth's Chris.
Ruth's Chris.
But for just a real good meal, I've been turned on to a place on 7th Street, El Bravo Mexican food. It's
Okay.
a little family-owned restaurant.
Very nice.
Not expanding, not over. Yeah, really great food.
Yeah, I'll have to check that one out. I'm very familiar with Ruth's Chris. I'm assuming the one in Scottsdale because the one in Phoenix
Yeah,
is
that
gone.
closed, yeah.
Yeah, and then you said El Bravo.
El Bravo.
All right. Are there any exciting places in Phoenix that you've discovered lately?
Well, thanks to you, I got to go to Odyssey
Oh,
and check
nice.
that out for the first
Yeah.
time. Yeah, that was really enjoyable. And I didn't realize they kind of have that little plaza in the middle that
Mm-hmm.
you don't even have to go to the aquarium. Just walk around, live music playing. The weather was gorgeous. That was a really nice day. So
Yeah,
thank you.
it's a really cool complex, and
Yeah.
I can finally support it now that they got rid of their dolphins.
dolphins, yeah.
Yeah. I was not a fan of that.
No.
So now that they're gone, we can all go in and enjoy the aquarium.
Yeah, the otters are my favorite. So I'm going to get a season pass and just go watch them play all
Yeah,
day.
right. Super cute, and the penguins were great, and the complex itself, they've done a really good job with the restaurants. It's so family friendly,
Yeah.
and you could spend a lot of time there.
Agreed. Yeah, I agree.
Very cool. I like that. And what's one of your favorite Phoenix neighborhoods?
Neighborhood.
Yeah.
I really like Desert Ridge right now. That
Okay.
seems to really be developing and growing up. There's some hotels over there, so they're kind of planning it out, I think. Planning, and now they have their own freeway exit too. So kind of excited to see what they're going to be doing there.
Yeah. Desert Ridge is great. They've got that subdivision. Is it Sanctuary? I
I
think.
don't recall the name.
Desert
but,
Ridge.
yeah. Oh yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah. It's beautiful. Yeah, Desert Ridge is great. Great desert scenery.
Yeah.
I like the mall that's right there.
Yeah.
Lots of food
lot of
options and
access.
shopping and stuff. So
And so close to all the freeways too, right?
yeah,
there
absolutely
at the
getting around
T,
town. Yeah, I can see why you like it. What's your favorite Phoenix hangout spot?
Ooh, Hangout. I really like Lucy's at the Orchard. They've got
I
a
love
really
Lucy's.
nice patio. Yeah,
Yeah.
you can just go hang. And then Churn, they've got a real nice patio. Got some ice cream
Yeah.
and sit and hang and just chill. People come up with their dogs.
You like some good places.
Yeah, thank you.
And what would you say the best Arizona site to see is?
Ooh. Going to visit probably Sedona.
Yeah.
Yeah, just the Red Rocks, the cooler
That's
weather.
Kind of the common answer that we get.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm going there this weekend.
I mean, we've got, is it Mount Lemon down in Tucson and the observatory? But it's a little bit further to go
Yeah.
and quite a bit more strenuous. I mean, you can just drive into Sedona and sit and have lunch.
Right? Yeah,
right?
Sedona's a quick drive.
Yeah.
It's an hour and
Yeah.
25 minutes or so just north
Very
of here.
nice.
Yeah. Very nice. Well, thank you so much, Jayme, for joining us today. It's been a pleasure learning about estate planning and trusts. And if anybody wants to reach out for you, again, we'll make sure all your contact info is in the show notes. And thank you guys for tuning in. We'll see you next time.